Well, today's really special because I'm here with a man who is just a wealth of knowledge when it comes to Israel and just the history and everything about it. I got to do an incredible trek with Moshe here from Nazareth to Capernaum, the Jesus trek, a couple of years back, and learned so much and had an incredible time. And he runs an organization called Keshet Journeys. Is that right?
Yes.
And just has a beautiful heart to help people connect with the gospel and what we can learn about in history in the actual place where so much of it took place. So thank you for your time. Thank you for being here. And I'm excited just to ask you a couple of questions to get your perspective.
Great. Yeah, thanks for coming this time.
Yeah, it is kind of crazy times, and you are serving in the military and active, and so it's incredible just to see the work that's being done here to protect this country and all of that. But when it comes to the story that we find in the Bible, I think so much of myself as like a Western reader and audience, when I read it, it feels like I'm jumping into the middle of the story. Like there's been a lot of things that have happened that unless I'm aware of, the first couple of seasons and episodes, it can be hard to understand a man like Jesus who shows up on a scene. But before we get into all of that, I'm just curious if you could explain a little bit about this location. Where are we now, and what is its significance?
Yeah, we're here on top of most likely what we believe is the city on a hill that Jesus was pointing out when speaking on the Mount of Beatitudes in Matthew 5:15. And it's probably the place or the city that received the gospel first after Jesus crossed over here and healed the demon-possessed. So it's actually a site that just recently opened up for the public. And it's been amazing, beautiful view, especially at sunset. And it's just inspiring because here we really can connect to the story and realize that, yes, most likely one person's testimony here was changing the whole region of the Decapolis where we are now.
Yeah, and we were able to watch a little video that sort of showed a bit of an animation and sort of the history of it. And the thing that really surprised me was just how many churches were discovered, churches that were full of believers, the original, I guess, converts. And are you able to help us understand a little bit in that story what is believed that happened after the man who was demon-possessed met Jesus?
Yeah, it is quite a turning point because when I was taking people around the country earlier, I was always taking them to Jaffa and Caesarea as the point where the gospel went to the Gentiles by Peter only. Because Peter had the vision in Jaffa and was able to eat all the unkosher stuff, and then went northwards along the coast to Caesarea Maritima, and there ministered to Cornelius. So that was the point where I was as well telling people there where the gospel turned from an inner Jewish belief to the world. And that Caesarea is the symbol of going out. But I actually, by dealing more with the story here on this new site, and it took really the Israel to open the site for the public, for me personally to realize that this is so significant here. Because when Jesus never visits the Gentile city, he doesn't go to Caesarea. Caesarea was the capital of the whole country for so many years, and in the time of Jesus. It wasn't Jerusalem. So Caesarea, he didn't go there. He didn't go to Tiberias, that was a pagan city. He didn't go to Sepphoris. He didn't go to any of the Gentile cities, not Jaffa neither, where Peter was. It was as well a Gentile city. So the question is, by him as well saying, I only came for the lost sheep of Israel, was always, was he at all ready to go and step out and And that was always a big question for me. Or was it only Peter then and Paul who took the mission out to the world?
Because I recently read that as well in my Bible, and I said to myself, was Jesus only there to reach the Jews then? Is that what he thought? And then Paul kind of has another idea?
Yeah. I was always in my back mind, going into visiting churches, and, we've been working together with a big church, and going at their conferences was just like a miracle. You see this Jewish man of 2,000 years ago is changing lives everywhere to the ends of the world. And but was that at all his mission by saying this one sentence? So first of all, we see it was his mission, and everyone was included in this salvation. And that's what actually made people mad. When we look at Nazareth, when he in the synagogue there tells them, reads from Isaiah 61, and this has been fulfilled in front of your eyes. And he is actually telling them, I'm the Messiah. But that is not what made them mad. They were amazed. It's written they were amazed. But only then when he speaks about the Gentiles, about Naaman the Syrian, and that they actually are more open for the message than the Jews, then they became mad. Imagine just living in a world where only you are the only people that believe in the one God. Mm-hmm. Nobody else at that time. They all believed in stones and sculptures, and the Jews were the only ones believing in God. So they looked down on them as well in the perspective. On the other hand, there were as well in a spiritual perspective, they looked down on them. But on the other hand,
they weren't enlightened, so to speak. They didn't worship the one true God, which the Israelites knew.
Exactly, and they were the oppressors as well,
right?
As the Romans being the ones controlling and occupying that land. So, in that perspective, they said, "This is crazy, Messiah. Why should a Messiah come for those Gentiles, those ones who eat pigs and
believe in rocks?
Believe in rocks." And then Jesus says this sentence that sometimes confuses us, but the problem is that we don't understand. In Jesus' time, the Jewish people were not seen as all of Israel. So we have the 12 tribes of Israel that went out of Egypt. And then we have a long story, and that is as well part of the context, that by dealing with the story you understand who are the lost sheep of Israel from a historical perspective as well. The 12 tribes came out of Egypt. They settled here in the land. The northern kingdom, that is here, the whole northern kingdom of Israel was destroyed by the Assyrians in the year 720 BC. And then the Assyrians scattered them around the world, mingled with them, intermarriages, and the identity of 10 tribes got lost. Some refugees went to Jerusalem, to the southern kingdom, the Judean kingdom. And then the Judean kingdom in the year 586 BC was destroyed by the Babylonians. So they went to exile, came back, end of Old Testament time. Anyway, the Jewish identity, or the Jewish people, are mainly descendants of the identity of the Judeans, the southern kingdom. We have another 10 tribes that we don't know where they are. They're scattered around the world. And actually, I can track my Jewish identity back 500 years into Spain. According to my name, my family, where they come from. I spoke Spanish until my grandparents. But I cannot 100% say that I'm more descendants of the 12 tribes leaving Egypt than you are, or than any one of our listeners are. So the thing is, as a bigger spiritual family of Israel, and especially by following Jesus, we're anyway part of that story and grafted into Israel as well. But it's spiritually is what matters today. But I'm telling that even most likely even physically,
Right.
there
Bloodlines.
could
yeah.
be a chance. We can't track it anymore. And people were able to convert to Judaism. So there's no bloodline in that perspective. It's just the Jewish people kept this identity and kept this language and kept the faith in the God of Israel up until that. God used the Jewish people to come to the point where we are today, for all the others to realize, yeah, God is doing something in this world and is making miracles, especially in those crazy times we are living in now. But yeah, here we see that Jesus, yes, goes out of the Jewish people and reaches out to the demon-possessed. Here in that area, somewhere surrounding it, most likely in the burial caves of this city Hippos, and there where he's healed, and Jesus tells him, no, you can't come with me, you are called to tell it.
Yeah.
Go tell your people. And who are his people? If he was living under the dead, on the necropolis of the only city in that area, so most likely to his people, he was probably an outcast of that city. And the chance, we don't know 100%, but there's a big chance that Hippos are the first ones to receive the gospel. The first Gentiles, those who were eating pigs. We have a pig, pigs where the demons went into them, and they didn't exist on the other side of the Sea of Galilee with the Jewish villages. So it's much earlier, and here we are as well at the point where we see that's the point where the gospel went to the Gentiles. And it's beautiful because not only that, it's where Jesus comes back again to that Decapolis area. Here we are in the Decapolis at the sea, and then the multitudes knew him. So we have a proof in the Bible that the testimony of one crazy guy changed the whole region. And the multitudes came to Jesus on his second return, and he fed 4,000 people. You know, this is symbolically, but nothing is for vain in the Bible, not in the Old Testament. No number is for nothing. But we can understand it's feeding of the 5,000, there are 12 baskets left.
Which feeding the 5,000 happened on the Jewish side of
near
the
Bethsaida.
sea.
And here,
the feeding of the 4,000 was on the Gentile, or outsiders.
And there were 7 baskets left.
7.
12 to 7, whereby as well it's including the 7, it's called the 7 Gentile nations. In the Hebrew perspective, were the 7 Canaanite nations that are mentioned in the Bible were always seen as the Gentiles towards the Jews.
Wow.
So here the Gentiles are included in the story, and it's just amazing to be physically at a place and connected to that.
Yeah, there was, as you were mentioning, that idea of just there being so much significance to even numbers and what we see in the Old Testament. When I was researching the Passover and the sacrifice that was required, one of the things that stood out to me was that it was God's people who were required still to have the blood over their doorposts, that they were required to have the sacrifice for themselves, saying that they too needed salvation, they too needed to be covered by God's blood and mercy. But if you look at it, prior there was Isaac, Abraham and Isaac, in a sacrifice, and then the Lord steps in and provides the ram for the sacrifice in place of Isaac, and that was for one individual. Then you fast forward and you have Passover, which is for a household of believers. Fast forward, and then you have the sacrifice that the priest does on behalf of the entire Israel nation people. Then you fast forward and you have Jesus, who has the sacrifice, the perfect Lamb of God, for all of the world. And so there's these sort of like stages that one could say, if you zoom out and look at it from a larger perspective, is that. But I think often of the feeding of the 5,000, and I don't think from my sort of Western mindset of the fact that it was out of the ordinary for Jesus to come to this place where we're seated today, because it was a Gentile place. And yet he still fed them. He still cast the demons out of this possessed man, and he became the missionary. And we know from history and from walking around this area the impact that his one life had on many believing in this Jesus. And I think for me, the book of Hebrews is really interesting because it talks so much about sort of the backstory and then the transition into, the fulfillment. It's almost like part one and part two of what takes place. But do you have any thoughts from your understanding of how all of this took place as to maybe some insights or significance to what took place in the transition of, Jesus shows up on the scene. He brings this new spiritual reality, this new spiritual kingdom with him. But he's a physical man. He's a historic man as well who lives here, dies, and is resurrected, has this following, this group of people who follow him. He has this other group of people who hate him. There's just so many angles that we could take. But what is some perspective that you think about when you approach the man Jesus and his introduction or fulfillment of a first covenant that the people were living in a transition into a second or new covenant, which we find ourselves a part of today?
Yeah, I don't think we really can understand the new covenant without the old covenant. But as well, we cannot look always at the old covenant through the eyes of the new covenant. And it needs to be looked from the old covenant into the new covenant, so the opposite way around. Because if we try to look at everything in the perspective of Jesus, we don't even know how these disciples really thought. They didn't know he's gonna die and resurrect. They were prior to this time. So how did they understand when Jesus was teaching them on the kingdom of God, or what, or on the judgment, or whatever, or what did they knew? What was their biblical education? How did they understand? So, as well in the perspective that his disciples and what they knew about the Bible was not wrong at the time, because Jesus didn't die yet on the cross.
Right.
So there's a certain truth to the Old Testament there's a truth to the Old Testament, and there's probably a true way of understanding it prior to Jesus' crucifixion. So therefore, many times I realize how important it is to look at the Old Testament, study the Old Testament, not always thinking right away to connection to the New Testament, and then it gives us a much better understanding of what Jesus taught his disciples. It's the Beatitudes. There's so many layers of the Beatitudes, but it's based on certain laws, not laws that limit us, but laws that protect us in our daily life. There are certain laws in the Bible how to mourn correctly, for example, for your loved ones. So God He knows us exactly, and He knows how the Egyptians dealt with death,
Right.
and the death culture and the death worship that many of the non-Israelite nations performed. So God knew how He created us and how He wants us to get out of mourning, to deal with death in a way where we celebrate life and not death. And we are back to the same story. Today we are against forces of evil that celebrate death, whereby we are called to celebrate life, to free hostages, to do everything possible to and we're not here to die for a certain cause, because we are here to die not to die, but to fight to live, all of us together. So it's and the Bible gives all these instructions how to deal with that, how to deal if a family member dies, and Jesus says then, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Now, if you look at it from a lone Western, it's just a small example from a whole sole Western perspective without knowledge of the Old Testament and of God's commandments to protect our way of living, I don't think you can understand it right. Mm-hmm. But if you go into the Jewish mindset, and what did the disciples knew and were used to do at the moment Jesus teaches this one sentence? And then you understand that he actually is speaking here to protect the community and how we, it's about the laws between you and your neighbor prior to what you do to worship God. It's about your community and your church, your community, and how to deal with it. So there's treasures that you can find by just understanding the Jewish mindset, and then Jesus' teaching on it just makes it clear for you. Mm-hmm. And it's amazing. I mean, we could go hours into this, but there are things in the Old Testament, in the Jewish law, the biblical law, that rabbis missed. Would they just have read one sentence of Jesus, everything would have made sense. But they've lost it, and they've gone away with it in so many different directions because they didn't get the answer 2,000 years ago by Jesus. So he, by fulfilling the law, by not deleting anything from it, but to fulfill the law, has a much deeper perspective by knowing or trying to learn how the disciples of Jesus, or how the audience, the Jewish audience of Jesus, understood that at that time, and how Judaism took it as well to certain different levels. Don't take Judaism of today as a representation of Judaism of Jesus' time. It's a very important part as well. But by learning more, especially coming here to the land, you'll have a different perspective, and Jesus is just even more significant by understanding this.
Yeah, and I think what you mentioned right there, especially at the beginning, hits home to me, because I tend to read everything through the New Testament lens of where we find ourselves now, not understanding that they didn't see the fulfillment, they didn't see what was coming like we are able to looking back. And I think there's so much to reading a story from that perspective of, Jesus being a man born under the law to fulfill the law, and like you said, not delete it, but to introduce what the book of Hebrews refers to as a better promise, a better covenant. And it's the inclusion of the outsider, the Gentile, which would historically be someone like myself who may not be Israeli. To your point, I may be Israeli to some, bloodline back in my history, but to understand that I come from a lineage of outsiders, but that I'm included into this spiritual realm, this spiritual reality, is profound. When it comes to the idea of Jesus including the outsider, you mentioned earlier this sort of spiritual reality, this spiritual lens. I think a lot of people struggle with the idea of the spiritual simply on the fact that it's not visible. I think in my culture, there's so much weight placed on what's tangible, physical, measurable in a very pragmatic sense. What is the spiritual worldview or mindset of someone living in this time? Because you have people who believe in rocks and deity and, the one true God. But when Jesus introduces a spiritual kingdom, what does it mean for them when they're thinking about the idea of spirituality? Is this something that's relevant in their life? Is it something they think about a little bit? Or is it a major part of their life?
It depends a bit who we're talking about. Is it the Jewish people or the Gentiles here in that area? I think the Jewish people had a longing for a Messiah, but the problem, it's a longing of a Messiah that frees them from the Gentiles, from the Romans. That is a physical, they were waiting for a physical redemption, not a spiritual redemption, not one that says they need to repent, get baptized, start a new life. That was not the majority of the Jews. Yes, there was a minority of the Jews, and they were a group called the Essenes, and they believed in being reborn by baptism. The extreme version of that group lived in the Dead Sea area, in the desert, in solitude, in a community life, and they in their scriptures use that term of rebirth kind of as an extreme reaction on the corruption in Jerusalem, whereby it could be that the scenes in Jerusalem, and as well the community where Jesus was hosted as being at the Last Supper room, were most likely scenes. Well, I believe from a theological perspective, the 3,000 that got baptized at Pentecost were probably former Essenes to its majority. From a theological perspective, they would have agreed with Jesus. Yes, they make a business out of the Temple Mount. Yes, we are looking for that spiritual redemption. But the majority was looking for physical redemption. So that was the Jewish perspective. But when he came here, hard for me to know what they expected. I'm not a specialist in Roman mythology, but I mean they probably were demon possessed, as we see here. They were,
which is a spiritual reality, and they were very aware of that.
A spiritual reality, but I don't know in what box they put it, or who can heal them in their faith from that, or is it how they were looking at this demon-possessed man? Was it a punishment from the gods? Was it whatever?
Right.
So I yes believe being healthy and or healed would have been seen as a miracle.
Right. A power over whatever this power was.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I believe just they have many sick people here in this area. And then healing, that there's somebody who could heal you is probably they would have thought, oh, there's some magician or whatever walking around. Or if they've had been influenced a bit by the Jewish people, if they've had heard that there's a people on the other side of the sea that actually believe in one God and there's a Redeemer and they speak about the Redeemer, it could be that they knew a little bit what the Jews are looking for. Maybe they were as well a little jealous on the Jews. Maybe not. Maybe it was always all through the time that people were drawn to being part of the Jewish people or know about what the Jewish people believe as being God's people. So it might have been a certain interest there, whereby Jesus comes and heals him. He's not a magician that came from the other side of the sea, but oh yeah, maybe he's that Messiah that the Jews are looking for. Maybe they've heard about this expectation. So that is maybe an interesting research to do. But yeah.
It's an interesting worldview or idea, because obviously when you look at Jesus' life and ministry, so much of it was the miraculous. It was performing miracles, and the religious, the Pharisees would see it and say, well, who can do miracles but, someone who's on God's side, because that's their perspective, that's their worldview, right? And he's like, you can't cast out the devil with the devil. Like no army, opposed against itself is going to prosper. And so we see that there's some sort of belief system at work on one side of the lake, maybe we don't have the whole picture for this side of the lake and what they believed. But what I will say, again, I found so interesting is their acceptance to it, their openness to it, in that they said, maybe it's almost like the simplicity of, Jesus speaking to the children, saying that you have to become like a child in your belief to be born again. You have to sort of have this humility. And they're saying, well, we're over here possessed by demons, and this man can cast them out. He can make us whole again. Well, we're just going to believe that. Maybe it's a simpler belief. It's not the layers of history and tradition that the Jewish people had, but it's a belief, right? And so I think for so many people, I would say that those who have gone and spent their entire life in universities and studying, even friends of mine, some of them struggle with belief now because they have so much knowledge. And I don't think that the Bible contradicts reality. I think it actually paints us the framework for us to be able to understand reality. But I think there's a Western mindset around a very mental, thought-driven world, whereas we are mind, but there is spirit, there is soul, there is body. There's more to our existence than just our own thoughts. What would you say is your perspective or mindset on the idea of belief? Because faith or belief, this hope in this unseen world, is core to a believer's. I mean, we're called believers for a reason. We believe in something. What is your frame of mind around belief or faith? And where does that come from?
Yeah, I think I was discussing with my wife lately as well, where things and what we do with our children, where it comes from. And it comes from, first of all, the parents. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is something, it has a huge impact, like to come to faith with parents who were non-believers. It's a total different level. I have certain basic things that I just know are right and not and wrong, but that's generational.
Right.
Probably I grew up believing in God, believing in Jesus. My father is Jewish, my mom is Christian, father is Israeli, my mom is Swiss. I grew up in Switzerland, came here 20 years ago. So I have certain values that were given to me by my parents. Now, you have up and downs in your life, walking with God, but what actually is for me the proof of everything is the miracles like back then He does in my life. Is it from simple things? Is it just that dots are connected together and things work out? In my work, my calling, that God just brings things together and makes miracles happen, and if we pray and ask Him for help, He'll solve everything, and really everything. It's so many miracle stories only in my work field, personally, my family, being here in Israel, war, issues, army, I had many miracles where I survived, and really with His help. So it's those small to big miracles in your life that you connect to Him leading you in your life. So it can be silly, stupid things, but little symbols that just confirm you again. Yes, He's with us. To big miracles, but we shouldn't wait for only big miracles, because the small things that lead us as well on the way. So that is for me faith. It's more than faith. It's really knowing God is here. It's more than faith. Faith is, and believing is not knowing, because if you know, you don't believe anymore. It's knowing, but it's a borderline, because I know God is with us. I know He's here. I know, Jesus is Messiah. So it's certain things. And why do I know it? Because He's proved it to me. Because otherwise I wouldn't be here where I am, and I wouldn't have seen all those miracles in my life. So I think it's the same for me than back then for these people. Yes, he creates a miracle. They followed him. They knew, they learned, they realized, oh, okay, what is it at all, a Messiah? When the message went to Rome, how did people understand what a Messiah is? The Jews taught them. Yeah, so the Jews taught the Gentiles in the churches, and all the letters that Paul wrote were letters to communities. Some of them were taught by Jews how to see it all, the concept of the Messiah. So I think it's education and miracles that bring you to where we are. And I think, yeah, and again, I'm not only because I'm doing it, but coming here is a different level. I don't say you cannot follow Jesus without coming to the land of Israel, but by coming here, it's just a total different level. It's like, as you don't go, you have a good friend and you want to know him better, the only way is to visit his house, and his family and his land and his place. You know a person much better by doing this. So that's why, yeah, I believe everybody should come here.
Yeah, and I mean that's the very reason why I'm here. Why I had so many people ask me like, why are you coming now? And it's like, well, I believe that I'll be safe and that I'll be careful, but I really just like, my heart is to walk in the very place where the story took place. Like, how am I meant to articulate something that is just way over there that I can't see, that I can't walk in? But like, everywhere I walk, every turn that I drive here, I'm exposed to more realities and more distinctions of, oh, that side of the lake is the Jewish side. This side is the Gentile side. Jesus actually came over here. Why is that significant? Well, actually, there's a story. There's so much more to it. And so I think the depth and meaning has truly come to life by being able to experience this place. And so I just want to say thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your insight and your wisdom and a bit of your story with us. It's truly special. Is there anything else you'd want to say to someone listening?
No, I mean, in these times of war, you just go through Instagram and then pops up somebody who is in Israel. So I just texted you, what are you doing here? And that's exciting, and it's just special because in any time coming here, it's God leading you and revealing things to people by coming over. But especially in these times, I knew there's something special to it that you're here, and it's exciting. It worked out. Amazing to see you again after March 2016.
Yeah.
That's the last time we've been touring together here.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. And thank you for joining. We will be connected again soon for the next episode.